Hey there, I thought I would share in this video today some information about the GAPS diet. It's the Gut and Psychology Syndrome diet created by Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride. And when I sat down to do the outline for this video, I was trying to remember how I actually became aware of it. So I looked over at Jeffrey, my husband, who was sitting on the couch next to me, and I asked him, like, hey, how did we ever first hear about this GAPS diet? And he said, and I quote, "It was your super smart husband that found it on YouTube." And yes, as much as I hate to admit that he's right, because I really like to be right, it was him who found it on YouTube, and he was really impressed with the results that people were having from it, so he showed me the video. And then I believe we watched another video, and from there I ended up finding out that there was a book written by the creator, Dr. Natasha, so I bought her book and read it, called Gut and Psychology Syndrome. And this is a book that got me, someone who at the time was on pretty much 100% plant-based diet. So this full-fledged vegan was now all of a sudden, because of Dr. Natasha, boiling chicken feet on the regular. I'll circle back to that in a minute. And it was a bit of a hefty read. I read the Kindle edition, and although it's only 370 pages, which isn't massive for a book, it's kind of average, it was not the easiest to read. It felt like it was written to deliver information, not to entertain, which I imagine was exactly the author's intent. And unfortunately, there is no audiobook. Although you could buy the Kindle version and have Alexa read it to you if you are interested in reading it but have trouble reading books. So Dr. Natasha believes that poor diet and a leaky gut, or increased intestinal permeability, I believe is the technical term for it, is the cause of a lot of physical and mental health conditions. So Dr. Natasha says in this book that a well-functioning gut with healthy gut flora holds the roots of our health. And just as a tree with sick roots is not going to thrive, the rest of the body cannot thrive without a well-functioning digestive system. And although diet definitely plays a big role in Dr. Natasha's protocol that she puts out for patients, she also talks about in her book the role of stress and how long-term chronic serious stress can and does have a damaging effect on our intestinal flora, on our gut health. So it seems like no matter what research I'm talking about these days or what video I'm making, at some point I'm talking about stress and how it's impacting the body. Lots of times we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, but today we're looking specifically at the effects on our gut health. And although her diet and her protocol was originally meant to address cognitive issues, since then it seems to have expanded to show effectiveness for other conditions as well. And I've definitely heard buzz and talk in the chronic fatigue syndrome or ME CFS community about the GAPS diet and people having some success with it. And it is something that I incorporated into my own CFS recovery, not the full GAPS diet, but some aspects of it. So I thought it was definitely worth sharing. So here's the basic premise. According to studies carried out, about 90% of the toxic contents found in our blood, which usually find their way to the brain, come from our gut. So healing the gut will reduce the level of toxins found in the gut and in the body and the brain. And the GAPS diet, GAPS obviously standing for Gut and Psychology Syndrome, works through 3 stages: to balance gut flora, fix nutritional deficiencies, and heal a leaky gut. And depending on how much healing is required, this diet could last anywhere up to a few years, which is long. But when you look at some approaches to health recovery, a lot of the changes that people are advocating are permanent. So you make these changes and then this is it for life. So at least this one is somewhat temporary, and you do have this light at the end of the tunnel that you get to return to something kind of normal when it's all done. And this is something that definitely resonated for me at the time, because I had been all over the fermented foods and I've been eating them for quite some time. So this was really in line with my approach to healing. You know, fermented foods like sauerkraut, which is fermented cabbage, or kimchi, which is also fermented cabbage, kombucha, fermented tea, kefir, fermented milk, and so forth. She advocated eating fermented foods for the same reasons that other books that I had read did, which is that they are packed full of naturally occurring probiotics. So for me, probiotic supplements really hadn't been helpful, but when I switched to trying to get probiotics from food-based sources, fermented foods, then I saw loads of difference. And I know I've talked about this in a ton of videos. It really just is impossible to exaggerate how much benefit I got and continue to get from eating fermented foods. I still eat them multiple times a week, every single week. The other piece of her diet, or one of the pieces that she talks about, enter the chicken feet, is bone broth. She advocates drinking homemade bone broth with every single meal. Now, at the time, I hadn't been on a plant-based diet for all that long. I never went on it with this intention like, I'm going to be a vegan until the day I die. I didn't even want to make the switch to a vegan diet. It sounded hard and restrictive and not fun, but I'd read about the benefits that lots of people were having, so I knew I had to give it a shot. But it was always on a trial basis, and I was always open-minded to other things. So when I read this book, the bone broth piece sounded convincing. And I also had a friend at the time who was older than me, close to 50, and she made and ate bone broth on the regular, and she looked at least 10 years younger than her age. Now, this might have had nothing to do with it, but both of these things were in my life at the same time. So between Dr. Natasha saying, drink bone broth, and then seeing my gorgeous friend all the time that seemed healthy and vibrant and so active and looking great and always making bone broth, like, okay, I'm gonna give this a shot. And bone broth, if you've never made it, and she advocates making your own because apparently store-bought stuff doesn't always have the nutrients that you're looking for, but it involves taking bones from animals, just as the name suggests, and boiling it or cooking them in a pressure cooker for long periods of time. So I was living in Indonesia at the time, and I would go out and I would buy a chicken, and I would actually roast the whole chicken and then just boil the bones. And because I wasn't eating meat at the time, and this is so wasteful, but I would just throw the meat away. Go ahead, judge me if you like. I'm judging myself. I know it's super wasteful. Looking back, I should have done something with that instead of just wasting food and throwing it away. The one thing I will mention is that I was buying in Indonesia what they called kampung chickens, which kampung just means village. So it was like these little farm chickens, and they're about the size of my hand. They look like anorexic little chickens. They had very little meat on them. But even still, I could have done something far less wasteful with that. So yes, I was this almost now full-fledged vegan who was boiling chicken feet and chicken carcasses every single week, and then sitting down with my whole plant-based meal every day for dinner with a cup of bone broth to go with it. But I'm really not sure if the bone broth ever did help me. The fermented foods, I could tell there was significant changes, right around the onset of when I started eating them. It's really been clear to me that they've done a world of good for my health. But the bone broth, I was never really sure. So I did it for a few months and then I stopped. I didn't notice any changes in my health when I started doing it, and I didn't notice any when I stopped. That being said, I was consuming it during a time in my life where I was making progress, steady progress with my health, so it might have contributed. I think of some of these things in healing kind of like the saying, I don't know if you've heard about advertising. They say 30% of all advertising works, you just never know which 30%. Sometimes with healing, I think it's kind of like that because we try so many different things, and I just find that I don't always know what things are helping and which things aren't, especially when we do a lot of things all at once. So it may have helped, it may have not. So some other components of this diet is that they are very high in fruit and vegetables. So that was in line with the diet that I was doing at the time. But she does also advocate eating a lot of meat, a lot of animal products, meat and dairy, which at the time I was not doing. And that was flying in the face of everything that I was currently reading about diet and its link to health. Although the animal products that she's advocating eating are not what you find at your typical grocery store or at any restaurant that you're going to go eat at, or at least not most of them. She's talking about organic, free range, no antibiotics, really natural and really healthily bred animals and animal products. When she talks about eating cheese or kefir, she's talking about getting the milk from the goat out in your backyard, like nothing pasteurized, nothing, no chemicals, no anything, just really natural, healthy sources of animal products. And in addition to that, to follow the GAPS diet, you also need to eliminate grains, sugar, soy, pasteurized dairy, starchy vegetables, and processed foods, because they're said to feed pathogenic bacteria in your gut. So there are 3 phases to the GAPS diet. And the first is the introduction phase that I mentioned. So with 6 stages to that phase, starting out very, very, very restricted with very few foods that you can eat, and then slowly building up over those 6 stages. Now, I won't go into the details of the foods that you can eat at each of those 6 stages because I would bore you to death. But what I will do is put a link in this video description of a News Today article that shares a nice overview of what those 6 stages are. So if you're curious about learning more, but you're not quite sure yet if you want to buy and invest the time to read the whole book, you can check that article out and it'll sum up nicely for you what those stages are. And depending on where your health is at, this first stage can last anywhere from a few weeks all the way up to over a year. So the second stage, as I mentioned, is the full GAPS diet. So you're still avoiding all grains, sugars, starchy vegetables, and refined carbohydrates and processed foods. And this phase lasts anywhere from 18 to 24 months. So you're going to be on the full GAPS diet for quite a long time. And some of the acceptable GAPS foods that are allowed on this diet are things like eggs, meat, fish, and shellfish, either fresh or frozen only, fresh vegetables and fruit, garlic, natural fats such as olive oil, coconut oil, and ghee, moderate amounts of nuts, and baked goods made using nut flour. And with the GAPS diet, Dr. Natasha also recommends that you eat only organic food as much as possible, avoid all processed and packaged foods, so very much a whole foods diet, eat fermented foods with every single meal. And one good piece of advice that she had in this book that I wish I had when I started eating fermented foods is to start extremely, extremely slowly, especially if your gut is in exceptionally poor health, which I suspect mine was when I started eating fermented foods. For example, she suggests if you start eating sauerkraut, so that fermented cabbage, it'll be in a container and it has liquid in it. And just start with like a teaspoon of just the liquid. Don't even eat the sauerkraut straight out the gate. And when I started, me being gung-ho, like I am with everything, just jumped in with both feet and started eating it large quantities every single day. And after a few days of this, my gut was a mess. I was so bloated and I think I was constipated. I don't even remember. It just hit me hard because it turns out that introducing billions and billions and billions of bacteria into your body all at once, even if they're the good kind, the right kind, is really a shock to the system and really not advised and can just be stressful on your body, actually. So start slowly. And she recommends drinking bone broth, homemade bone broth with every single meal, which is one of her things that I did incorporate. She also recommends avoiding eating fruit with your meals because it can cause digestive issues. And she also recommends that when you do eat protein, animal protein foods, that you also combine it with vegetables because this will help with the acidity and overall digestion and be easier on your gut. So after you do your 18 to 24 months of the GAPS diet, then is the reintroduction phase, which can last anywhere up to 6 months to take you to get off of this GAPS diet. So after you've experienced 6 months straight of good gut health on the GAPS diet, that's how you know it's time to start stage 3, the reintroduction phase. And this last phase is just essentially reintroducing most of the other foods over a period of a few months and seeing how your gut fares. A lot of people who do the GAPS diet choose to stick with, still eliminating processed foods and all the things that we know to generally be bad for us. Now, Dr. Natasha also explains that this diet could actually make you feel worse before you feel better because of the die-off reaction or the Herxheimer reaction happening in our body, which is something that is said to happen when our body is detoxing. So as it heals and it starts moving around toxins in your body and your body's trying to process all of that, you can start to feel worse, which I always found a really interesting thing when I was doing my own health recovery because I'd read about this a lot, the die-off reaction, the Herx reaction. So if I tried something new and I felt worse, I was like, oh, I feel terrible. This must be working. But then I think, or maybe it's just bad for me and maybe I'm actually getting worse. So it's really confusing, I find, to tell, why am I feeling worse? But it is something that she cautions people to be aware of, that if you start feeling worse on this diet, it's probably a sign, in her opinion, of this Herxheimer reaction. So will this work for everybody? Will this cure chronic fatigue syndrome on its own? I don't think there's any evidence out there that says unequivocally that it will. It sounds like, at the very least, it seems a safe assumption that it could potentially help with your gut health and your brain health, which seems like always a good place to start. Again, links in the video description if you want to check out her stuff. So I hope something in this video was helpful, but if this doesn't sound like it might be for you, whatever you're facing, hang in there. Don't give up. Keep searching. Do not give up until you find answers. There are all sorts of things out there that help people fully recover from their health issues. And I really believe that there's something out there that will help you recover from yours. And if you enjoyed this video, I'll link on the screen here to a video that I did a while back that is covering research done by Dr. Dean Ornish that is clinically proven to help loads of people fully recover from chronic illness and disease. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.